Welcome to my draft guide for Murders at Karlov Manor. The set just finished being revealed today, and I think it is going to be a dramatic change from what we've experienced in Lost Caverns of Ixalan. So remember to click like and subscribe and leave a comment. It helps bring my content to more people, and I really appreciate the support. You can also click join to become one of my first YouTube members. And today we're going to be going over the set's mechanics, the top commons, the archetype themes, color fixing, and combat tricks. And if you're interested in the full set review, it will be available here on YouTube on Saturday and Sunday. 2 parts because it was kind of a long experience. So with that, let's get started. So the first thing to do here is the mechanics. So the first returning mechanic is face down cards, and through 2 new keyword abilities and actions. So we have disguise, which is a keyword ability, and cloak, which is a keyword action. And so first we'll cover disguise. Disguise is an ability that lets you cast a card face down by paying 3 colorless and then announcing that you are using a disguise ability. Anytime you have priority, you can turn a face down permanent with disguise face up by paying its disguise cost. So very similar to Morph. The face down spell has no mana cost and no mana value of 0. When you cast a face down spell, you put it on the stack face down so that no other player knows what it is, and you pay 3 to cast it, and this is an alternative cost. The creature spell is a 2/2 creature with Ward 2 that has no name, mana cost, or creature types. And same with the creature, and both the spell and the resulting creature are colorless and have a mana value of 0. Other effects that affect a spell or a creature can still grant it specific characteristics or change the characteristics that it does have. Anytime you have priority, you may turn the face down creature face up by revealing what its disguise cost is and paying that cost. This is a special action, so it doesn't use the stack and can't be responded to. So you can't like shock the 2/2 as soon as they announce that they're going to undisguise it. Exactly like Morph. And then only a face down permanent can be turned face up. A face down spell cannot, which matters for cards with cloak. So cloak a card, you put it onto the battlefield face down. It becomes a 2/2 face down creature with Ward 2 that has no name, mana cost, or creature types, just like the disguised card. And then anytime that you have priority, you can flip it up just like a disguised card. And if a creature would have disguise or morph, if and and it were face up, you can also turn it face up by paying its disguise or morph card. That makes sense. So you can choose between which one. Sometimes you end up having both a cloak ability and a disguise. So um, unlike a face down creature that was cast using a disguise or morph ability, a cloaked creature may still be turned face up after it loses its abilities. If it's a creature card, because like disguise is an ability, the cloak is not. And if a double faced card is cloaked, you still put it onto the battlefield face down. And while it's face down, it can't transform. And then if the front face of the card is a creature card, you can turn it face up by paying its mana cost. If you do, its front face will be up. So just some general notes on the face down cards. Casting a face down creature spell using a morph ability now requires you to declare that you are using a morph ability. There's no morph in this set, but it will matter if you're playing with multiple sets. And anytime that you look at a face down spell or permanent you control, but you can't look at face down permanents or spells that you don't control unless something allows you to do so. If a face down creature loses its abilities, it can't be turned face up with the disguise ability because it no longer has a disguise ability or disguise cost. And the permanent is on the battlefield both before and after it's turned face up. Turning a permanent face up doesn't cause any enter the battlefield effects to happen. So you'll see there's a couple of cards in this set that have bad enter the battlefield effects. So if you play it for its disguise cost and then flip it face up, you can get around those. And then because face down creatures don't have a name, that can end up playing with some cards. There's one specifically that can't be blocked unless a creature has a name. And a permanent that turns face up or face down changes characteristics, but is otherwise the same permanent. So spells that affect the target, the permanent face down, and auras, they aren't going to disattach or anything like that. And then turning a permanent face up or face down doesn't change whether or not that permanent is tapped or untapped. So if you attack in with your disguise guy and then undisguise it, it's still going to be tapped. And if a face down spell leaves the stack and goes to any zone other than the battlefield, if countered, for example, you do have to reveal it. And so, similar, like if you bounce a face down permanent and causes it to leave the battlefield, then you must reveal it. And you must reveal all face down spells and permanents you control if you when the game ends, which matters in best of 3. And you must ensure that your face down spells and permanents can easily differentiated from each other, and you're not allowed to mix and match and try to trick your opponent. If something tries to turn a face down instant or sorcery card on the battlefield face up, reveal that card to show all players, and the permanent remains on the battlefield face down afterwards. And abilities that trigger when a permanent turns face up won't trigger because even though you reveal the card, it never turned face up. So some nitpicky rules there for a new mechanic. For the most part, nothing too crazy. The next one up here is we've got a new enchantment type, which is called Case. And each case has 2 special keyword abilities, To Solve and Solved. So to solve, you have to meet a specific condition at the beginning of your instep. If the condition and the case is not solved, it becomes solved. And the meaning of solved differs based on what type of ability follows it. So it depends on so if you solve like an activated ability, it means the activated ability activate only if the case is solved. And then activated abilities contain a colon. So some of them will be like sacrifice after you've solved it, so you can only sacrifice that. And then some of them are triggered abilities. So the triggered ability only happens if the case is solved. Triggered abilities use the word when, whenever, or at, and they're often written in a different way than the activated ability. And then the solved is a static ability, which means as long as the case is solved, then the static abilities are in effect. So creatures you control get +1/+1, or instances and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. That happens as soon as the card becomes solved. The solve abilities will check for their condition twice. So once when the ability would trigger and once when it resolves. If the condition isn't true at the beginning of your instep, the ability won't trigger at all. And if the condition isn't true when the ability resolves, the case won't become solved. So once a case does become solved, it stays solved until it leaves the battlefield, and cases don't lose their other abilities when they do become solved. Being solved is not part of a permanent's copyable values, so a permanent that becomes a copy of a solved case is not solved, and a solved case that somehow becomes a copy of a different case stays solved. So once again, some of it's a little bit in depth, but I like to get the rules out there just so that everybody's like clear. And if you have a question, feel free to leave a comment down below. I'll do my best to answer it. Next up, we have new keyword action collect evidence. And so collect evidence is like collect evidence X or collect evidence in. And what you do is you exile cards with total mana value in or greater from your graveyard. So collect evidence 6, you'd have to exile cards with a total mana value of at least 6. You could do more. And then if you can't exile enough cards to meet or exceed the required mana, you can't choose to collect the evidence at all. So you can't like do half of it. And once you've announced that you're casting a spell, players can't take actions until you've finished doing so. So notably, opponents can't try to remove cards from your graveyard to stop you from collecting evidence. And then we've got a new keyword action here, suspect. Some spells and abilities will allow you to suspect a creature. Suspected creatures have menace and can't block. And when an effect suspects a creature, it becomes suspected. It gains menace, and this creature can't block for as long as it's suspected. It stays suspected until it leaves the battlefield, or another effect causes it to no longer be suspected. If a suspected creature loses all abilities, it will lose menace, and this creature can't block, but it won't stop being suspected. Being suspected isn't a copyable value. If a permanent becomes a copy of a suspected creature, it won't be suspected. And if a creature is already suspected, suspecting it again won't have any effect. There's no limit to the number of creatures that you can have that are suspected simultaneously, so suspecting a new creature doesn't cause other creatures to stop being suspected. And we've got a returning mechanic of clue tokens and investigate. Whenever you investigate, you create a clue token. Clue is an artifact type, even though it appears on some cards with other permanent types. It's never a creature type, a land type, or anything but an artifact type. And it's if an effect refers to a clue, it means any clue artifact, not just an artifact clue artifact token. For example, you can sacrifice one of the equipments. So there's like kind of a clue fun like wrench, candlestick, etc. So you can sacrifice those to pay for costs of cards like Alquist Prof, Master Sleuth's activated ability. You can't sacrifice a clue to pay multiple costs. For example, you can't sacrifice a clue token to activate its own ability and also to activate Alquist Prof's ability. Some spells and abilities that investigate may require targets. If each target chosen is an illegal target as that spell or ability tries to resolve, it won't resolve. You won't create any clue tokens. So keep that in mind. There is one card specifically that like says that you can like may make something into a suspect, and if that target disappears, then the rest of it isn't going to resolve as well. So just something to keep in mind. Some abilities trigger whenever you sacrifice a clue. Those abilities trigger whenever you sacrifice a clue for any reason, not just to activate a clue's activated ability. And then we have a returning mechanic of split cards. Each split card has 2 card faces on it, and each card face represents an individual spell that you can cast. So you can cast one side, but you can't cast the other. You can't cast both. To cast a split card, you choose one of its halves to cast. There's no way to cast both halves of any of the split cards featured in the set. That was something that we saw in the past. It is not something that they're bringing back, at least for this format. And the split cards have 2 cards faces on a single card. The characteristics of the half you didn't cast are ignored while the spell is on the stack. So if you are casting Cease, it's a 2-cost spell. But then once it's in your graveyard, it is still a single card. So if you discard a split card, you've discarded 1 card, not 2. And if an effect counts the number of instances and sorceries in your graveyard, cease and desist counts once, not twice. Each split card has 2 names. If an effect instructs you to choose a card name, you may choose one of those names, but not both. And a split card's characteristics are a combination of its 2 halves while it's not on the stack. For example, Cease and Desist has a mana value of 8 while it is in your library or in your graveyard. If an effect allows you to search your library for a card with mana value 4 or less, you cannot find a card like Cease and Desist. If an effect allows you to cast a spell with certain characteristics, consider only the characteristics of the half you're casting. For example, if an effect allows you to cast an instant or sorcery spell with mana value 2 or less from among cards in your graveyard, you could cast Cease this way, but not Desist. So with all that behind us, it's a little bit. So the rules of Magic are complex, man. So I hope I did well in describing it. I think I got a little bit stuck up there for a second, but it's okay. Now we're going to go over my top commons, and we have Thraben Inspector. Novice Inspector is basically just a reskinned Thraben Inspector, and this was, it was a top performing common. I can't remember which format it was in, but basically you get a 1/2 that when it enters the battlefield, you investigate and you create a clue token. And so these clue tokens were really useful, and I think they're going to be really useful in this set as well. So being able to get the 2 cards in one is, later in the game, I think it's going to come down to who created the most amount of clue tokens that then you can turn into card advantage against your opponent. So if it's a very grindy set, and I feel like that it has the chance to be, so this gives you a body to kind of block up the early pressure, but also then gives you late game card draw. Reasonable Doubt, I think, is going to be a top blue common. It's a quench, and then you can also use it to affect the tempo of your opponent. So not only because the cards that come in with disguise have ward 2, being able to counter them is better than single point removal because you'll have to pay the ward once it's on the battlefield, right? So being able to counterspell your disguised 3-cost creatures I think is a really good way to get rid of some of those problematic disguised creatures. And then being able to create something, either give your creature menace to make it a better attacker, or to remove your opponent's blocker, I think can do some really interesting things from a tempo side standpoint point of view. And then we've got murder. Murder is a classic. We got instant speed removal. The only downside is the double pip black. So, but this is just an amazing removal. We've seen murder before, and it's always performed really well. Uh, it'll be interesting to see if this is a little bit of an exception, because if the set is mostly made up of disguised creatures, kind of like Khans of Tarkir was a lot of 2/2 ward creatures, or 2/2 morph creatures. Uh, Murder, if you're paying 5 to destroy something to get through the ward 2, then that's a little bit worse, right? So it'll be interesting to see how the set plays out with destroying the things that are disguised or not disguised, and how murder will play. But I have good feelings that it's going to be good for murder. And then for red, we've got Person of Interest. Person of Interest is a 2/2 for 3 in a red, but it spawns a 2/2, and then when it comes in, you suspect it. So the reason why I really like this card is usually, I mean, like two 4/4 worth of stats across 2 cards is already usually pretty good. But then Menace, I think, throws this over the top, because this is 3 attackers in 1 card. And so as far as like pressuring your opponent's defenses, I think this is a really good way to enable going wide. And then we have Tunnel Tipster, which I think is going to be a top green common, because it's the mana dork. It doesn't help you fix, but it helps you ramp. And then if you have played a face down creature, either through cloak or through disguise, then this gets a +1/+1 counter on it. So it can grow into a bigger threat as long as you are playing the disguise and cloaked creatures, which are quite common throughout many of the archetypes in the set. And then we've also got the Gravestone Strider, and I think this is going to be a top colorless common, because I think that you're not going to have a very strict 2-color space. So it's a mana fixer. It only works once a turn, but being able to 1-for-1 change your mana can be really useful if you're trying to splash these one-ofs, or these really powerful bombs. Also, you may notice if you look at the full card list or watch my full set review, um, there's a huge amount of multicolored cards. So it took me an hour to go through each color, but it took me 2 hours to go through just the multicolored cards. So the list is a lot longer than what we experienced in Lost Caverns of Ixalan. And then also, if you self mill this, or after it dies and it goes to your graveyard, you can exile it to exile a target card from a graveyard, which can be useful for attacking your opponent's large collected evidence, right? So mana value of 6 or something in your opponent's graveyard is a useful resource, and so I think removing it is going to be applicable, and is kind of a nice thing to tack on. Also, the 1/3 stat block is going to block your opponent's 2/2 ward to disguised creatures quite well. A couple of them turn into 3/2s, which is not so great, but at least in the early little bit, you'll be able to get like a free block out of this. So now for my favorite part of the full thing here is the archetypes, and each color pair usually gets an uncommon signpost, kind of clue us into what the archetype is about. First up, Azorius, or White Blue. The theme is detectives. So it's looks like it's going to be a fast mid-range strategy that looks to leverage the detective creature type, and then you investigate and create clues to refill your hand in the late game. And we Demir, or Blue Black. Theme is clues control. You're going to be using controlling blue and black spells, and then use the clues to gain card advantage over your opponent in the late game. Rakdos, or Black Red's theme is suspect aggro, which is going to utilize Menace to push, because the suspect makes the creature have Menace and not be able to block. It's going to be very one-sided to whether or not you have the play versus the draw of all of the archetypes, because you can't play defensively. But you're going to utilize that Menace to push pressure and on your opponent's defenses, and try to kill them before they set up defenses to answer your threats. And then we've got 10 Street Gossip. Gruel, or Red Green, theme is big disguise. And so basically what you're going to look for is mana acceleration into playing disguised creatures that have large costs, big haymakers, and then just a classic like gruel ramp strategy. And then we've got Celestia or Green White, and the theme for Celestia is Go Wide Disguise. So you're going to try to flood the battlefield with as many cheap creatures as you possibly can. And then there's a couple of cards that nod to playing face down permanents. I do feel like the Gruul archetype is a little bit more, or red green is specifically more towards the skies creatures than Celestia is, but there is some. And then we've got Wisp Drink. I keep reading the card, my bad. Orsov or White Black. And the theme for White Black is pint sized disguise. And what I think is interesting about this one is you can kind of think about it as power 2 or less. So there's a lot of cards in here that are looking at tokens that are naturally small, like 1/1 spirits or 1/1 bats, and creatures that just naturally have 2 power. But you can also use take advantage that the disguise cards can be played in any, because the disguise cost is colorless. You can play them in any archetype, and so I think Orsov is the one that's looking the most to just pick up disguise cards because they have power 2 or less, and just play them as such. So curious to see how this one goes. And then we've got the Is It or Blue Red, and this one I'm not 100% sure I agree with the artifacts theme being artifact sacrifice, because when I went through the set review, it kind of felt more like it was going to be a spell slinger theme, where you use the good looting and the good card draw spells to quickly fill your graveyard for collecting evidence. Um, so like I think this is kind of one of those like lean into like Timur or the green blue red archetype, where you can then use your card draw from the blue red to fuel your collecting evidence from your green blue Simic cards. And then I think there's also a chance that Jeskai or blue red white might be very interesting, because blue white is really good at creating tokens. And so you have some of these like Thopter tokens and detective tokens, and maybe you could kind of do like a go wide space in Jeskai as well. Insidious Roots, Golgari, or Black Green. The theme for Golgari is Grave Break, and so Grave Break is specifically creatures leaving the graveyard, whether or not you're using them as like collected evidence or if you're reanimating them. You kind of go either way. And I think this one also naturally pairs pretty well with the Sultai space, so the black, green, blue, kind of enabling your graveyard collecting evidence. Like I think there's some natural synergies there. And then we've got Boros or red white. The theme is battalion, and that means to attack with 3 or more creatures. And so this is your go wide aggro. If Celestia is more of a go wide mid range, then this one doesn't really have as much disguise stuff. You're not going to waste time playing a 2/2 for 3. You're just going to try to get as many cards on the board, and then beat your opponent down by going wide. And then but because they both have that kind of go wide theme, there's an interesting space in Naya, right, with the red, green, white. And then we've got we've got Simic, which is green, blue, and the theme is collect evidence, which pairs nicely with black for the Sultai graveyard things. I think that you could do like a Timur space as well, like I mentioned. So I'm really curious to see how the archetypes go. Like I said, I don't think it's going to be strictly 2-color archetypes. They do have a theme that is pretty straightforward, except Orsov was a little harder to figure out. But there's some really good mana fixing in the set. So first off, we've got Case of the Shattered Pact. It's a colorless, uncommon case that allows you, the first little bit is to search your library for a basic land card and put it into your hand. So this can help you kind of, find your stuff. And then later gives you, if you have 5 colors among permanents you control, then you get a solved enchantment that gives your target creature flying, double strike, and vigilance every turn. So I'm not sure I'm going to go fully into 5 color, but it is still decent enough fixing to just go find something. And then if you do end up with the 5 colors among all permanents you control, then that's happy times. There's also a fair amount of fixing in green. So Nervous Gardener has a disguise for 1 green that allows you to look for a land card, not specifically a forest, but a land card with a basic land type, and then put it into your hand, then shuffle. Notably, the rare tap lands of the set do have all of the basic land types. So you can go get a non-basic land because it has the basic land type. Um, they went this way is search your library for a basic land card, and then you also get to investigate. It's a little bit expensive. We kind of see this in several different colors where you have a typical, like a spell that you would normally see that is one colorless more to play or to create a clue token. And I think it's going to be worth it because I think the clue tokens are going to be really important. This is a way to fix and also a way to ramp. And then Topiary Panther is definitely worth pointing out. You basic land cycling, so you can go find that basic land card and then put it in your hand and shuffle. Importantly, though, too, this is synergistic with collecting evidence because on turn 2 you land cycle this, and now you have a 6 evidence that you can utilize in the Sultai space. Got Buried in the Garden, which is a Celestia card, but it does allow you to tap your enchanted land for an additional color, additional 1 mana of any color. This can be removal as well as fixing. And curious to see how this one plays out because usually I want my fixing to be a little bit more available rather than at turn 4. So the pace of the set will really determine how good that card is. And then we've got an upgraded or power crept Evolving Wilds or Terramorphic Expanse, where typical thing, you get to sacrifice it, search your library for a basic card, and put it into play tapped. But this one also can sacrifice to make a creature with power 2 or less can't be blocked this turn. So if you didn't think Evolving Wilds could get better, it just did. We've got the Public Thoroughfare, which I'm not super excited for. It does allow you to tap for any 1 mana of any color, but when it enters, you either have to sacrifice it unless you tap an untapped artifact or land you control, and it comes into play tapped. So that's a pretty hefty tax. But, you know, if you can play it as a tap land and like tap a clue or something like that, then like maybe you can get it to work. I'm probably going to be avoiding it because I think there's better fixing out there. And then Scene of the Crime is another one that I also think is kind of unplayable. You get a colorless land that can tap for a mana of any color if you tap an untapped creature that you control. It is also a clue, though, which can kind of be fun because like it is an artifact, and there are some artifact when they are sacrificed synergies, so maybe it will find a place in the format. And we have Branch of the Vidogazi, which I think is going to be really good. I'm excited about this one because you get a disguised creature that then if you need to like duck out of it, oh, it's going to die, you don't want it to die, you can pay 3 to turn it into a land. It then removes it from combat because, you know, like it doesn't have any life total. So you can block with it too, and then turn it into a land. And then it gives you 2 mana of any 1 color. So it's not necessarily a fixer because it does tap for colorless, but it does the turn that you're going to do the disguise trick. And then until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phase is end. So you can do it after the combat phase and then use it to play some off-color splash. And the last thing I would like to cover for you guys is the combat tricks in the set. And there are a lot, so I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as possible. So we've got Auspicious Arrival, 1 and a white, target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn, and investigate. Make your move, 2 and a white, destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature with power 4 or greater. Not on my watch, 1 and a white, exile target attacking creature. And on the job, 2 double pip white for the kind of board pump creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn and investigate. So because there's a whole bunch of these instances and combat tricks, like I think that's really going to play an intricate part of the combat in this set. And so you know it's going to be good to keep these in mind about what at least your opponent can do, right? For blue, we've got Behind the Mask, which is you can either you can turn an artifact into a 4/3 until end of turn, or you can turn something into a 1/1 until end of turn if you collect the evidence 6. So it's kind of like you can use it as removal, you can use it as a combat trick. Eliminate the Impossible is one to definitely keep in mind because it gets around the ward. And so this one, it triggers and investigate. Creatures creatures your opponents control get -2/-0 until end of turn. And if any of them are suspected, they are no longer suspected. So if you attack in with your suspected aggro Rakdos deck and you're expecting your menace to actually count, this removes all of their menace and gives them -2/-0. So this is going to be an incredibly pain in the butt uncommon to play around. defensively and also enables some of your attacks. Like you might think that your 2/2 ward 2s are going to trade with their 2/2 ward 2s, but then they do this, they don't have to pay the ward, and suddenly you lose all of yours. So definitely one to keep in mind. Out cold, this one's a little bit more for like calculating combat math about what you can expect to block with. They can tap up to 2 target creatures and put a stun counter on each of them for 4. And then Reasonable Doubt is the quench. Play around the counterspell. If they do have the blue mana, you might have to pay 2. Sudden Setback, which is kind of the unlucky drop from Lost Caverns of Ixalan, except for it can return spells to your opponent's hand and cost 2 blue. And then we've got the Unauthorized Exit, which is the Brackish Blunder or Bounce, and you can hit a non-land permanent, so it's not just a creature, and causes a Surveil. So this one I'm really curious about because like when you play your disguised creature, I don't think the disguised creatures are going to be very good targets for bounce because of the ward. But then once you reveal them and you pay for the disguise, then bouncing them back can be really detrimental because some of the cards, like what we saw in black, the disguised cards have bad enter the battlefields. And so you have to play them out again as a 2/2 ward 2 and then pay the disguise cost again. So we'll see. We'll see how this one plays out. If it's going late enough and we're like actually paying to undisguise everything, then I think the bounce is going to work better than if it's just really fast tempo ward 2/2 colorless creatures. And then we've got Burden of Proof, which is a flash enchantment that gives a creature +2/+2 as long as it's a detective. Or you can turn something. They can turn something into a 1/1 that can't block detectives. So this one is specifically for like when you're playing against blue white. And then Fey Flight is a flash enchant creature. Enchanted creature gains hexproof until end of turn, so they can fizzle your murder. And then also enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and has flying. So sure to try to account for that as best you can from your opponent's attacks. Long Goodbye. 1 in a black. This spell can't be countered, so it gets around the ward. Destroy target creature or planeswalker with mana value 3 or less. This one's just going to be crappy removal, but it's something to keep in mind. If you're going to be doing like a pump, they can do this in response, and you get 2 for 1. Which is partly why I'm so down, if you watch my set review, on some of the tricks in the set, like the bite spells and fight spells, are not going to be great up against a Long Goodbye. Murder, we've already covered that one, is the instant destroy target creature with double pit black. Presumed Dead. This is an example of one of the cards that I'm not very stoked about because it can get 2 for 1. But until end of turn, target creature gets +2/+0 and gains. When this creature dies, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control and suspect it. Very aggressive card. But yeah, so keep this in mind if your opponent has 1 in a black. You got Slice from the Shadows, which is another instant speed removal. So lots of instant speed removal in this set. And this one gets around the ward on the 2/2. And also gets around indestructible, which there are some indestructible cards. I think 2 that come to mind. Yeah, so being able to give -X gets around that indestructible. And then we've got Toxin Analysis, which instantly gives something Death Touch and Lifelink until end of turn. And then Soul Innervation, which can give a creature -4/-4. It's an enchantment with flash. And then whenever 1 or more creature cards leave your graveyard, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life, which is kind of that Grave Breach of Golgari. So synergies there. And then for red, we've got Caught Red-Handed. Also can't be countered by the ward, but this is the threaten of the set. It's very expensive, but it does give the stolen creature suspect, and that means that it's going to be able to attack with Menace the turn that it's stolen. So this is going to remove a blocker and then create something that needs 2 blockers to be dealt with. So I think, I'm glad to see this at 5. And the other thing too is I think the suspect is going to remain. So the creature that if the game is still going, when the creature is returned back to you, it's going to have Menace and can't block. So it removes future blockers down the road as well. The Chase is on, gives +3/+0 and gains first strike and investigates. Kind of expensive for what it's doing personally, but something to keep in mind if your opponent does have 2 in a red untapped. Felonious Rage is or Felonious Rage is target creature you control gets +2/+0 and gains haste. So they're probably going to play this on a creature that just came in pre-combat, but they don't have to. And when that creature dies, they get a 2/2 white and blue active creature token out of it, so they may want to do it on something that is going to trade rather than give something haste. Galvanize is 3 damage to a creature, so like a Strangle, but for 2 mana. And then if you have drawn 2 more cards, it deals 5 damage instead. So depending on what your opponent has, this one, for it to deal the 5 damage, they're going to have to like pop a clue token before they do it, so it would cost 4. Still something to keep in mind to play around. And then Shock. You've got Classic. This is an old staple. Shock deals 2 damage to any target for 1 red. Green has Fanatical Strength, so we're seeing the staggering size from Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Target creature gets +3/+3 and gains Trample until end of turn. I think this is going to be really good with the 2/2 Ward 2s clashing into one another. Being able to give +3/+3 and Trample and get over the top. As long as you're using the ward so that the single point removal doesn't end up destroying your Fanatical Strength. So only time will tell if the Ward 2 is enough to protect you. Get a Leg Up is an instant that gives +1/+1 for each creature you control and gains reach. So that's one to keep in mind, both defensively and offensively. Got Airtight Alibi. Airtight Alibi is a flash enchantment that gives the enchanted creature +2/+2, and it can't become suspected. And if it is a suspect, it no longer becomes a suspect. And it also gains hexproof. So I think this one is a more defensive card that you're going to use to like protect some of your like your 2/4 reach or your 4/4 reach from your opponent's removal. While and also because of like the quench spell, being able to create something into a suspect means that they could remove it as a blocker. And so being able to flash, being like, haha, my thing that you thought couldn't block suddenly can block is something to keep in mind. And then last but not least, we also have these split cards. And so this one is specifically look at the left side. Plus is 2 and then a split between red and white. And that gives a +1/+1 counter on each attacking creature you control. So keep that in mind when lining up your blockers. If they do have that color untapped, be prepared for everything to get one size larger. And then Hustle. And this one is they can goad one of your opponent or one of your creatures into attacking, or taunting elf it into having to block. So this is another one that gives you a little bit of like, how am I actually going to play around this? That's kind of tricky. So I hope this was helpful though, and thanks for watching to the end of the video. Remember to hit like and subscribe for more near daily Magic the Gathering content. My full set review will be available on Saturday and on Sunday. And good luck crushing it during your pre-release. And as always, good luck getting those trophies.